All right. Good morning, PT on Ice crowd. It is Monday. Today's the 24th, September 24th. Holy smokes, already September. Almost over. Almost into October. So I'm on a little early this morning because I have a meeting this morning, unfortunately, that's going to be up against my typical 8:30 time slot. So I had to jump on a little bit earlier than I typically do. But wanted to make sure that I got it in before I head for some travel. So if you followed along last week, I am back from California in New Jersey just for this morning. Had kind of a late meeting type thing drop on my calendar for this morning, and then I head to down to Atlanta to hopefully have a great session with some employers. I'm really excited and looking forward to it. And then back from there home for a little bit, like a few hours, and then off to New Mexico for the rising tide. So this is sort of like the middle of my very, very busy next 10 to 14 days. And although incredibly exciting and potentially awesome, it's also been already a little bit fatiguing. So I wanted to dive in today. Let me start the clock. I wanted to dive in today a little bit about the concept of upstream, and I think the reason why I wanted to jump into it is because it seems like it's really starting to gain some traction. It's swirling around. People are talking about it and kind of getting it and really starting to figure this thing out and maybe even get to the point where they're ready to explore. It came up last night in our first unit review, unit 1 review on the cohort. The current cohort, but it also really came up a lot this weekend. Like I said, I was out in California at their fall conference or annual conference or whatever they call it, and I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity to do a keynote there. And it was pretty well received, I think. I mean, had some nice comments afterward. But then in kind of talking with people and then listening throughout the weekend, because there were some other sessions, Don Magnuson did a session related to pop health, and Todd Davenport did another session related to pop health. So I tried to sort of duck in there and hear what they had to say. And there's a lot of the similar kind of questions and mentality coming up. And I think that what that does is it says that it's in kind of the collective conversation. We're sort of having the weighing of pros and cons in our heads. And that always signals good things. It says that change might be on the horizon. We don't know when, but it might be on the horizon. So the question really becomes, how far upstream can we go, or do we want to go? And I think the key thing there is first, of course, recognizing that it's doable, that there's value in it. And that part seems to be now kind of becoming commonplace. People are talking a lot about upstream care. People are talking about, proving value. I hear that word a lot, or that phrase a lot. And even maybe with the shifts toward things like value-based care and models, that seems to be gaining even more traction. So it seems like this major shift in thinking, which of course I think is critical and long overdue, is beginning to happen, which is awesome. But then what happens is people sort of get into this tough space where they're not quite sure how far, like what's good enough. If I'm talking about the risk factors, is that good enough? If I'm, sort of talking about, hey, good morning, Brian. If I'm talking about things even further upstream, is that better? Should I be talking all the way upstream and talking to young kids? That was a question that came up, is like, if we really want to go all the way upstream and we really want to prevent things, then we have to start this early in life, and we should be doing this in the school systems. And of course, I know I've had the conversation with people before that, hey, we could go even one step further than that. I mean, we could be talking to moms when they have babies in utero. I mean, like that also would be a fantastic opportunity to make change. We know that that's a time of life of massive change, and certainly we know that the mother's day-to-day will have an impact on the child, and everything from the language that they use and the way that they eat can have a major role in the future health trajectory of this child. So it's kind of like, man, you almost couldn't possibly go upstream enough, right? Because then you could even go back and say, well, does the mother actually have all of the responsibility there? Like, do her choices come naturally to her during that period of time? What I mean by that is, like, the environment in many ways dictates what we do. So we've talked about this in the past, nudges and things around us, and how that kind of drives our behavior a little bit, how ultimately we will become our environment. And if you were to take two people and put them, they've even shown this kind of in twin-based studies, people with the same exact genetic code, and put them in different settings, you could get a completely different end result. The trajectory could be completely different because the environment has a role there. So it gets really complex. And I think that's sort of the essence of this whole thing, is at least embracing that, or understanding it, or if nothing else, just recognizing the complexity of that. That's really hard, and that it can feel almost overwhelming. Like, man, there's just too many factors. There's just too much going on. I couldn't possibly wrap my mind around all of it. And I think that the main take home there, and the thing that I guess I want to almost like respond to the folks who have those questions, is you don't have to. Like it's completely okay to say, hey, like you don't have to do all of them. Now, the truth is, if we want to make change, all of them have to be done. But that doesn't mean you personally have to do them all. And it's not like an either or. You don't have to say, hey, well, I don't do that. You know, like that's just beyond my scope. It could be a little bit more along the lines of, well, you maybe need to build a team. That certainly it needs to be addressed, and that without a doubt, as a health professional, if you're leaving it unaddressed knowingly, right? Like if you know these factors matter, if these upstream factors kind of predict sort of downstream effects, and you're knowingly leaving them open, then in my opinion, you know, you're not practicing well. You know, that's just bad practice, or maybe even worse. Maybe it's fraud. Maybe it's maybe it's willful neglect. Like, I don't know what it is, but the truth of the matter is if we say we're here to do no harm and help people, and we know there's potential to do harm if we look the other way, then knowing this, we have to evolve, we have to grow. And so the key thing really, I think, at the root of all of that is this idea that it's system-wide impact. And that the system-wide impact is really what we're kind of addressing and dealing with. So let me give you a classic example here. You know, there was a really nice paper, and I can find it and post it if you want. It was done by some folks at UCLA, and they were really talking about how the connect piece, right? What we call connect, the element of connect, sort of loneliness, social isolation, social connectedness, feelings of being kind of like involved and engaged, you know, part of a community. You know, how that lack of kind of connection can drive you know, like a distress type scenario in the system. So a biological response, a distress scenario, you know, sympathetic overdrive kind of a thing, as a result of an influence of a person either being disconnected or feeling disconnected. And they sort of made a point to separate those two, that you can have all the connections in the world, but if you feel isolated or disconnected, that can have a major role. And that essentially, without kind of going too deep into it, that revs up the system, right? So that revs up the nervous system, it revs up the system overall, and that's going to have other system-wide downstream effects, right? So we know, for example, if I'm all revved up all the time, metabolically, I'm going to change. Like, things are going to change. You know, you take a person, you put them into a stressful scenario, the way their body burns calories is going to be different. Their inflammatory load is going to be different. And so that could result in things like pain, right? That could result in things that we would otherwise, you know, kind of in a mechanistic approach call injury. But the truth of the matter is that it really might be a major driver, might be that feeling of isolation or that social disconnection. So when we start thinking about that seems complex, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a simple tactic if we're willing to. And that really is where we get into the question. You know, so what I wanted to do is think about, like, okay, if payment wasn't a problem, you know, if it wasn't payment, how would you treat folks? Like, in an ideal world, if someone said, listen, money is not an object, like, let's not make it about money. Let's just make it about the best possible care. You know, it's worth doing that exercise, because I think one of the things we know, and one of the things that we at least have to be willing to look at, is that money is an object, and that it drives some of our decisions, and how we sort of make decisions could be related to the finance of the situation. And although we might like that it not be, like, in an ideal world, boy, it'd be great if we could just sort of make this thing not about money and really just about sort of care. It is. But what would you do differently if it wasn't? You know, and if you can slowly merge those two worlds together, if you can find ways of saying, hey, listen, I can't allow it to be about money first. I have to allow, you know, sort of force myself into that creative version of care where I have to say, look, this may not be something that I would traditionally do. Then maybe we can actually get the result we want, and we can find a way to get it to more people. We can lower the price point, or we can make it more accessible, or we can find people who have money, right? Like, there's money out there. I mean, there are health systems with lots of money that their job at this point is to keep people healthy, and that they do better. They make more money if they're not spending it on care, right? So you're seeing this a little bit. there was some recent stuff people were kind of posting around, and there's been some actual, I think, pretty well done case studies in Massachusetts of doctors and physicians sort of driving this change in a health system that actually started to provide affordable housing for people with mental illness. And that was their care approach, right? The idea was, listen, it's way cheaper than to sort of give folks stable housing than it is to treat them in the emergency room and sort of let them use the hospital as a hotel, because they really have plenty of things wrong with them. We can certainly find something wrong if they show up at the ER, but in truth, they may just need a place to stay. And so that cost of doing that, you're talking about, rather than paying $100 a night, for some kind of housing, maybe you're paying $1,000 a night to spend a night in the hospital. And that's just a better approach. And that can you create stability? And of course, in Massachusetts, they've shown that actually works. And so the question for all of us then becomes, well, all right, well, like, where do we stand on that? Like, philosophically, where do you stand on that? And if you can't answer that question, then at some point you're going to have to. Because if you truly believe that you can kind of sit in the clinic and actually make an impact in the world. Like, if you truly think like, hey, I'm a healthcare provider and my job is to make an impact in the world, I think that's a little naive. Like, if we truly believe that we can sort of sit in our own little world and our own little environment and sort of just deal with the people that come in that are lucky enough to be able to get into our door for one reason or another, whether they were born into luck or they found us, or they stumbled in, or you just are super altruistic and you open your doors to everyone you possibly can. Like, even if you rocked that, it would be so few people that it wouldn't actually make a dent. And that's hard to handle. But if we start to think of it that way, then we can maybe look at it and say, hey, how can I broaden this? How can I build it a little bit? How can I find ways of kind of leveraging more? And maybe it's leveraging the connections I have in my community, or maybe it's, building something that doesn't look like healthcare, but has a health effect, right? Maybe it's about building communities and tribes, just simply getting people together so that people can do what people do, which is be together and feel cared for. And if you're doing that, you're making an impact on health. And then if you do that and you can show that it had that impact, can you find someone who values that? Right? So instead of saying, hey, I have to prove my value in the sense of you should pay me for this, maybe it's prove your value in the sense of show that it works. And then if you show that it works, then take it to someone and say, hey, listen, I did this here at a very small scale. I can do it with you too. And it might be worth paying for. And I guess the reason why I bring that up is because it was hugely validating. I had a conversation after the California address, and someone came up to me, and I'm not going to sort of elaborate too much, but that's kind of the conversation we had. Kind of the conversation we had was, well, what if money wasn't an object? That's not the problem that we have, right? The problem that we have is kind of getting it to go. Is having the therapists ready who can think about this and who can do this. It's having the people who have sort of the mind, bandwidth, the willingness to say, hey, like, I want to be in that space. And although it's probably not something I'm kind of classically trained to do, I can do it as well as anybody else, because no one's currently doing it. So if no one's currently doing it and it needs to get done, like, I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and do it. And so I think that's the challenge for all of us, is to somehow find a space where it's like, what's upstream enough? What's something that I'm willing to do enough where I can feel good about myself? Like, I can feel good about the impact I'm having, and then the money will follow. And I feel like that's something we're really stumbling on. Now I'm going to dive into this a little bit more, at the Rising Tide. I've been kind of working on what my piece will be, and there's some really cool stuff that I found, and I don't want to give it away yet. Maybe I'll do a talk after Albuquerque's done, but there's some real interesting stuff. I mean, there are some things that I think we can all kind of lock onto and deal with. So more to come on that. One of the things that we're going to do on the ice side, and hopefully you've seen this now, and I know Jeff posted something recently, is we've decided to sort of change the structure of the CERT course to match this idea, right? So one of the things that we've sort of had this ongoing debate is, the CERT course is intensive and it's long and it's expensive. Could we make it so that it might be a little bit more accessible so that PTs who want to be in this space, or professionals in general who want to be in this space, can access it maybe with a toe in the water first, and then eventually they can kind of wade in. And so one of the things that I'm really pumped about is that we've decided to change the structure of the course a little bit. We're going to put an intro course on the front end, which we think is super high value. It's actually pretty inexpensive for what we think you're going to get. And then from there, allow folks who go through that to then decide where they can put their toe in the water, how far upstream they can go. And if as far upstream as they can go is, I just can deal with it in my clinic. Like, that's as far as I can go right now. And although I love the idea of being an advocate for safe, play and maybe getting into schools or going with employers or dealing at population level or the policy level, like, I love that idea. It's just not where I'm at in my practice. I'm not there yet. And so I don't want to not practice this way and not make these shifts, but I can't do that yet, right? And so that's kind of why we've structured it. And so what you're going to see is that there'll be a course now of how can you make this work in the clinic? Like you're still in a clinical setting. How can you start? How can you put a toe in the water? How can you experiment a little bit? How can you do something with whatever patient is sitting in front of you or standing in front of you? And then from there, we're going to put another little piece in, sort of another secondary type scenario, which talks a little bit more about, okay, what about the person who really needs change? What about the person who you have the problem that we think most PTs have? Well, I'm running out of time, which ultimately is that people show up to you too late. They're getting to you and they're so complex at that point. It's like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. I couldn't possibly do it in time. How do you actually begin unraveling that for those that are in the right place in their life? And then, of course, we'll continue with the workplace piece and the population piece of, okay, how do you do this at scale? How do you do it with lots of people? So instead of just helping one person who is healthy, helping them stay healthy, or someone who's sort of made the effort kind of stay on track, or a person who really needs to make the effort and their mind is kind of getting in the right place, how do you still keep up with, sort of moving the herd? And I think there'll be more than that. There'll be more to come. But I just wanted to make sure that we're kind of thinking that way, because I think we're there. Like, that's the coolest part. This week so far, and I mean, we'll see. Talk to me tomorrow. Tomorrow after I talk in Atlanta, or actually, I guess it's Wednesday. Talk to me Wednesday. If Wednesday goes like I hope it will go, it will be very clear that we're there. Like, the world is ready for conservative professionals who want to be upstream of this stuff. The world is ready. We need the professionals to be ready. Like, that's the other side of the equation. And of course, I've got 100 now who are through the CERT course, or will be, and that's really, really cool, but we need more. I mean, there's no way we're moving the needle on this thing with 100 people. And the way that we're going to do that is by constantly getting people to try and do and talk about it, and build that community to do so. So anyway, I'm over time already. I'll leave it there. I guess the thing that hopefully I want you to do, and hopefully anybody who saw the keynote in California, and anybody who's in the current CERT course on the cohort, I hope you get to that point where it becomes, what's feasible for me? How far upstream can I go? Can I go fully upstream in my thinking? Can I go partially upstream in my doing and in my practice? And then can I actually track and watch that downstream effect? Can I take some credit for the change and the trajectory of people's lives? Because that's really what we're all doing here. All right, everybody, it's Monday. It's going to be a busy, busy week. Another busy 7 days for me. I hope it's busy and fulfilling for you. Busy is good when it's fulfilling, so I hope it's going to be busy and fulfilling for you. Have a great Monday. Get after it. I mean, like, it's getting close. The world is getting close. Get after it. Make it count.